For 30 years, the world saw André Rieu as the man who made millions smile, never suspecting how much he hid behind that carefully polished grace. Audiences believed they knew him, the king of the waltz, with the warm laugh, the glittering concerts, the effortless charm. But the truth was far heavier than the bow he carried. Behind every standing ovation stood a man fighting a private battle that no spotlight ever revealed. And when the truth finally surfaced, it became clear that André Rieu had been living two lives, one for the world and one for survival. André Leon Marie Nicolola Rieu was born on October 1, 1949 into a house where discipline overshadowed childhood and affection was nearly non-existent. His father, the respected conductor André Rieu Sr., ruled his home with the same precision he demanded from orchestras, leaving no room for laughter, imagination, or comfort. His mother enforced perfection with equal severity, dismissing creativity as weakness and treating emotion as a flaw to be corrected. What the public would later call elegance was born out of a boy's need to hide the fractures inside him. Even in interviews decades later when he quietly admitted, "My parents didn't love me," it was not bitterness. It was survival. At age 5, something shifted. A young violin mentor, only 18, placed a violin in his hands and unlocked something the rigid household had never allowed him to feel. Safety. She didn't bark orders or measure him against siblings. She encouraged him to listen, to feel, to breathe. For the first time, André realized music could be a refuge, a place where he did not have to defend himself. It was the first secret life he ever created. A quiet rebellion against a home where tenderness had no voice. His teenage years brought even sharper conflict. While other students practiced technical exercises, he chased resonance and emotional depth. His growing love for waltzes was met with contempt. His father famously snapped, "I didn't raise you to play waltzes." Words that cut deeper than any failed rehearsal. By 1968, when André brought home Marjorie, the woman who truly understood him, his mother's fury erupted. She ordered her to leave, and André walked out that same night. He never returned. Decades of applause would never fully erase the silence of that final walk. This early fracture split André's existence in two. The man he showed the world and the wounded child who learned to hide behind elegance. It was the beginning of the double life no one would see until much later. By the mid-1970s, André Rieu was no longer the silent boy rehearsing in dim hallways. He was a young musician wrestling with the rigid traditions of European classical institutions. At the conservatory in Brussels, technique was worshiped, and emotion was scorned. His professors demanded precision, not vitality. To them, waltzes were childish ornaments unworthy of serious performance. But André had already decided that his life would not be dictated by cold tradition. He wanted music that breathed, music that made people feel human again. Yet even this dream required him to build a second life, one hidden behind politeness, obedience, and the appearance of conformity. His rebellion took shape in 1978 when he founded the Maastricht Salon Orchestra, 12 dreamers who had more idealism than money. Their early performances took place in drafty community halls, aging wedding venues, and border towns where no critic bothered to visit. Yet these concerts, modest and unremarkable on the surface, were where André allowed his true self to appear. Here he wasn't the academically trained violinist. He wasn't the son weighed down by expectation. He was a man who simply wanted people to feel the warmth he had been denied as a child. But even rebellions require structure, and that came from Marjorie. She organized bookings, contracts, and financial survival with a precision that mirrored the discipline André despised from his upbringing. Yet this time it was softened by love. She became the invisible backbone behind his artistry, shielding him from logistical chaos so his fragile dream could live. For the first time, he was building a life that belonged to him, not to the shadow of his father. In 1987, he formalized his revolution by founding the Johann Strauss Orchestra. Again, 12 musicians. Again, critics sneered. Traditionalists mocked their colored costumes, their smiling stage presence, their audacity to believe classical music could bring joy instead of solemnity. But audiences felt something different. They didn't see defiance. They saw a man giving them permission to feel alive. André had created a global persona, but behind the scenes, his second life was emerging. A man pushing himself to exhaustion, fighting financial collapse, and carrying the emotional wounds he hid beneath elegance. No one knew it yet, but the cost of that dedication would soon shape the darkest chapters of his life. By the early 1990s, André Rieu had spent more than a decade climbing uphill, pushing his small orchestra forward with a determination that seemed limitless. But the breakthrough came in 1995 in a way no one, including André himself, could have predicted. When he performed Shostakovich's Waltz No. 2 at the UEFA Champions League final in Vienna, a stadium of tens of thousands froze. Football fans, people who came for rivalry, not refinement, fell under the spell of a waltz. When Ajax scored, the timing was so uncanny that it felt choreographed by fate itself. Overnight, André became a global name. The success was enormous, but it came with a cost that quietly carved deeper into the double life he had been living. Audiences saw magic, the sold-out arenas, the laughing melodies, the joyful signature twirl of his bow. What they didn't see was the relentless workload he carried, far beyond what any musician should endure. He was not just the performer. He was the producer, the financier, the organizer, and the caretaker of every life in his orchestra. More than 100 staff members relied on him. He was responsible for every flight, every hotel, every rehearsal schedule, every stage transition. And with every tour that grew larger, the risks grew with it. Traditionalists attacked him, calling his concerts musical pornography, sneering at the gowns, the lights, the joy. They accused him of degrading classical music. But André kept smiling, insisting that music operations in the world. More than 80 properties in Mrick, a fleet of trucks, hundreds of employees, and a touring system as complex as a multinational corporation. His net worth soared above $600 million. But it was a fortress built on exhaustion. The man audiences believed was untouchable was in reality held together by willpower and fear of disappointing those who depended on him. Behind the curtain, the cracks were spreading. André began experiencing dizziness, trembling hands, and waves of fatigue so severe he sometimes struggled to stand upright after a performance. But the show went on because he refused to let anyone down. His double life was reaching a breaking point and no one, not even his closest fans, knew how close he already was to falling. By 2010, after decades of non-stop touring, sleepless flights, and carrying the weight of an empire on his shoulders, André Rieu reached a breaking point he could no longer hide. What began as dizziness during rehearsals escalated into a full medical crisis. A viral infection had attacked his vestibular nerve, the core of his inner balance. For a violinist, it was nothing less than catastrophic. When he tried to stand, the room spun violently. When he tried to walk, the floor seemed to tilt beneath him. Doctors ordered complete rest. André, a man who had built his identity on delivering joy, suddenly could not trust his own legs. Tours collapsed overnight. Months of planning, tens of thousands of tickets, and millions of euros in production were erased in a matter of hours. Fans around the world worried, unaware of how close their idol had come to losing everything. Behind closed doors, André lay bedridden, his eyesight swimming, his heart pounding with fear that his career had already ended. What the public saw as a temporary postponement was in truth a fight for his livelihood and identity. He later admitted that those months were some of the darkest of his life. Conventional therapies failed him, leaving André feeling trapped in a body that no longer obeyed him. Then came a letter from an Australian fan who had survived the same illness, explaining simple vestibular exercises that had saved his own balance. Desperate, André followed them meticulously. Slowly, painfully, the spinning world began to steady. After months of recovery, he stood again. First with hesitation, then with fragile confidence. But even as he returned to the stage, the truth remained. The illness had never fully left. His equilibrium was damaged, vulnerable, and easily pushed into relapse. André's management publicly denied rumors of recurring vertigo in 2012. But the internal memo was clear. One more severe episode could put him in grave danger, especially if it struck during a performance. Yet, he continued to tour, driven by loyalty to his musicians and love for his audiences. What no one knew was that this was the second life he now lived, one where every performance was a gamble, where André fought silently against a body that had become his greatest threat. His double life had begun its cruelest chapter. The maestro adored by millions on stage, and the man battling instability and fear in the shadows. Just as André began regaining his equilibrium, life struck from a different direction, one no therapy or exercise could mend. In December 2016, while on tour in the UK, his longtime friend and trombonist RDE Merckx died suddenly in his sleep. RDE wasn't just a musician. He was part of André's inner circle, a constant presence in dressing rooms, rehearsals, and long nights on the road. When the news reached André, it hit him with the force of a physical blow. He led the Nottingham concert immediately, then halted shows in London, Birmingham, and Glasgow. The orchestra, often described as a family, felt gutted. One member later said, "It was like losing the heart of the ensemble." The grief carved even deeper cracks into André's already fragile health. And though he returned to the stage, the music carried a new weight. A subtle silence often appeared. A single missing bar between pieces never announced, never explained. It was André's private tribute to Rude, a pause for a friend he could not bear to forget. But sorrow does not pause a career. And by 2019, André was back to full touring intensity. Yet behind the polished performances, he was pushing through physical strain and exhaustion. That endurance finally broke in March 2024 during a 6-concert series in Mexico City. The altitude, jet lag, and a harsh flu collided into a medical crisis. Backstage, he faltered, breathless, feverish, disoriented. After the second concert, he whispered into the phone to Marjorie, "I don't want a first concert day like this ever again." 4 shows were cancelled. Over 40,000 ticket holders were furious. The entire orchestra, 125 people, were sent home mid-tour. For André, it was not just a professional disaster. It was a warning he could no longer outrun. In that collapse, a new figure stepped into the light. His son Pierre. Until then, Pierre had been the quiet organizer, the backstage liaison. But after Mexico, he became something else entirely, the gatekeeper of his father's survival. No more marathon tours, no more intercontinental strain. Pierre rewrote André's schedule with the precision of a doctor and the protectiveness of a son. Europe-only performances, mandatory rest, medical supervision, and limits on every encore and rehearsal. It was not surrender, it was survival. For the first time, someone other than André controlled the pace of his life, and it saved him. By the summer of 2024, André Rieu was still performing. But the transformation was unmistakable. The man who once lived on airplanes crossing continents without pause now moved with deliberate caution. Each concert required medical clearance. His team coordinated with physicians before every show. Hydration schedules, heart rate checks, oxygen availability, and strict limits on encore length were written directly into his rehearsals. The audience saw the warmth, the bow, the familiar smile. Only those closest to him saw the cost behind it. His son Pierre enforced these new rules with a firmness neither fans nor critics had ever witnessed. Before Mexico 2024, Pierre was merely the tour manager. After that collapse, he became André's shield. Every venue, every flight, every set list passed through Pierre's silent question. "Can my father do this without breaking?" André sometimes pushed back, craving the pace that once defined his life. But Pierre never wavered. He knew the danger without second.